The Etoile Royale restaurant was a symbol of sophistication and elegance, reserved only for the best establishments in town. Its grand crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with warm golden light, reflecting off polished wooden tables surrounded by plush chairs. The gentle aroma of French delicacies filled the air, mingling with the notes of fine perfumes worn by the guests. This evening promised to be as tranquil as always. John and Harry, two successful businessmen, had chosen the restaurant to discuss their new project. Their table, located next to a large panoramic window, offered a breathtaking view of the shimmering city night. Maria, the restaurant's experienced head waitress, was a master of her craft. Her movements were impeccable, and her face always neutral, even when fatigue set in. She was dedicated to her work and proud of the restaurant's reputation as an exclusive establishment for privileged guests. To Maria, it was essential to maintain this atmosphere and ensure everything remained perfect. However, this evening her attention was drawn to a man who entered the hall. A dark-skinned stranger in a light gray t-shirt appeared entirely out of place in this environment. His appearance, in Maria's eyes, disrupted the harmony and status of the establishment. Her thoughts were overwhelmed by stereotypes built over years. Maria, inwardly irritated, swiftly approached the man. Her steps were confident, but her eyes burned with determination. Instead of a polite greeting, she sharply remarked, "Do you understand that this restaurant is not for you?" Her tone was cold, and her words sharp. The room suddenly felt tension that attracted the attention of other guests. The man stood motionless and looked at her calmly. His facial expression was enigmatic, and his gaze firm. "I just wanted to have dinner," he replied in a low but measured voice. This response only intensified Maria's irritation. She decided to demand that he leave the establishment. John and Harry, who had been focused on discussing work matters, now found themselves witnessing this unusual scene. Their conversations fell silent, and their attention was riveted to the unfolding events. But the situation changed instantly when Maria looked more closely at the man. Her face suddenly froze, and her eyes widened. "The Rock," she stammered. Standing before her was Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the world-famous actor and athlete. Her confidence dissipated, and her irritation transformed into shock and excitement. When Maria finally realized who was standing before her, her thoughts became scattered. She struggled to hide the excitement that suddenly engulfed her. Instead of aggression, which had been her sole approach until that moment, her face now displayed surprise and awkwardness. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stood before her, smiling faintly but reservedly. His global fame, charisma, and impeccable reputation transformed him in Maria's eyes from an unwelcome guest to a symbol of success and greatness. Suddenly, her prejudices seemed absurd. She began to regret her words and felt uneasy about her initial behavior. All the restaurant's guests had now become participants in the scene, albeit silently. Their gazes were directed at Maria and Dwayne, and the air was heavy with tension. The elegant evening at Etoile Royale had unexpectedly turned into a theatrical performance. Maria hurriedly tried to regain control of the situation. "I apologize, Mr. Johnson. I didn't immediately recognize you," she said with a softer and more respectful tone. Her manners quickly returned to professional. Though her face still blushed with embarrassment, Dwayne barely smiled. He said not a word, but his calm reaction only heightened the gravity of the moment. Even without speaking, he demonstrated the strength of his character, which had made him an idol for millions. John and Harry watched the scene intently, barely concealing their curiosity. Their wine glasses remained untouched as they were completely absorbed by the events. Maria decided to go further and offered Dwayne a special seat in the hall. "Please, let me ensure your comfort," she said with a gesture towards the best table in the center of the restaurant. Finally, Dwayne replied in a quiet voice, "I just wanted a simple dinner, no extra attention." This remark was so simple that it seemed a lesson for everyone present. But Dwayne agreed to stay, and the restaurant's atmosphere gradually became somewhat calmer. This brief interaction between the waiters and the celebrity revealed one of the most important truths. Stereotypes always prevent us from seeing the true essence of people. For Maria, this incident marked the beginning of change, both in her perception and behavior. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson seemed entirely calm, despite Maria's sudden emotional shift. Guests at the Etoile Royale restaurant held their breath, watching the unfolding events. Their evening pleasure now seemed secondary. The dramatic scene took center stage. Maria decided to take control of the situation, offering special treatment to Dwayne. Her words were filled with respect, yet her inner tension was evident. "Mr. Johnson, we are delighted to see you in our establishment. Allow me to offer you the finest table," she said, her voice slightly trembling. Dwayne nodded, agreeing. He seemed to understand the significance of this moment, not just for himself but for everyone around him. His simple words, "Thank you," and "I value a straightforward approach," were a reminder that greatness doesn't require extra embellishments. He requested everything be left as it was and took a seat near John and Harry. This decision only enhanced his charismatic presence. The guests exchanged astonished whispers. They expected a dramatic gesture or a display of star-studded luxury, but received something entirely opposite. For many, this was a lesson: even the highest fame can be framed by simplicity. Meanwhile, Maria, feeling uneasy, returned to her duties, but her thoughts were filled with memories and reflections about how her stereotypes had nearly ruined the perfect atmosphere. She couldn't forget Dwayne's expression, his calm and confidence, which affected her more deeply than she could imagine. Over time, the hall slowly regained its usual atmosphere. John and Harry, trying not to show their curiosity, resumed their project discussions, though their minds occasionally drifted back to the events that had just occurred. For them, this evening also became an unexpected source of inspiration. The Etoile Royale seemed to become a stage for interactions between people with different stories, prejudices, and lessons they carried with them. Maria learned to value the importance of open-mindedness, while Dwayne, without any effort, became the embodiment of strength, dignity, and greatness. Etoile Royale always maintained a silence that could be called a mark of true exclusivity, but this evening the atmosphere was filled with whispers, quiet conversations, and endless glances directed at Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Even those who always behaved reservedly and adhered to etiquette couldn't help but be curious about the scene that had just unfolded. John and Harry, seasoned businessmen who had been discussing their new project, found themselves unexpected witnesses to the situation. Their wine glasses stood untouched, and their business notes remained forgotten. They exchanged looks, each realizing this dinner would not just be a quiet end to the day but a topic for discussion in the future. John leaned closer to Harry and quietly remarked, "This will be material for conversation for many days. Just think, The Rock in our restaurant, and at the center of a conflict." Harry nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on Dwayne, who had already started dining at the nearby table, ignoring the surrounding conversations. Across the room, waitress Maria felt as though she were under a microscope. She knew that the guests were watching her every move, evaluating her ability to handle the situation. Her inner tension grew, but she decided to act confidently even though her face betrayed her confusion. The chef, who discreetly peeked out of the kitchen, had also witnessed the scene. For him, this was not just a curious incident but a moment that could impact the restaurant's reputation. Etoile Royale had always been famous for its untouchable exclusivity, and such a public scene could become a reason for media discussions. The restaurant guests, observing the events unfold, began discussing what might have caused the conflict. Some suggested that Maria might not have recognized Dwayne, while others speculated that prejudice was the cause of her behavior. But no one could say for sure what had led to this unexpected resolution. Dwayne, sitting at his table, showed no emotions. His face remained enigmatic, and his demeanor restrained. He created a sense of balance that contrasted with the anxiety around him. He understood his presence had become an event and accepted it calmly, as though used to everything that accompanies a celebrity's life. For many guests, this was a moment of reflection. They realized that behind simple outward appearances, there are always deeper stories that can open one's eyes to many things. For Maria, this was the beginning of an internal transformation, a moment when she questioned her own beliefs. And for John and Harry, this dinner became a special occasion they would discuss for a long time in their business circles. As the evening drew to a close, Etoile Royale slowly returned to normalcy. The tension dissolved, replaced by introspection among guests. The restaurant, usually celebrated for its culinary and architectural sophistication, carried newfound significance. Dwayne finished his dinner and stood to leave, his gesture commanding quiet attention. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, his smile genuine yet understated. Maria felt the gravity of the moment. She acknowledged her flaws, recognizing the evening as transformative. Dwayne's humility became a beacon of change. For John and Harry, the dinner became a narrative of reflection, a lesson in simplicity and restraint. Dwayne's departure was met with quiet admiration. Étoile Ryle. The regaining its usual ambience had a new story etched into its history, one of humanity and the lessons left by the rock.